On episode 218 of the 40 Plus Fitness podcast, we meet with New York Times bestseller Jo Marchant and discuss her book, Cure, A Journey into the Science of Mind over Body. The full show notes for this episode can be found at 40plusfitnesspodcast.com/218. Have you decided you're ready to make a change? To reclaim your health and fitness? The 40 Plus Fitness Podcast is here for you. I'm your host, Alan Meisner. I'm an NSAM certified personal trainer with a specialization in corrective exercise and fitness nutrition. Let me be your coach as you find your way on your health and fitness journey. All right, let's go. We're getting to that time of the year when the resolutionists start to really tail off and go away. You know, they came in with all the good grand plans of getting healthy, losing weight, and getting fit. Worked out for a little while, did a few things, and then sort of just fell off. And I hope that isn't you. But if you did have a weight loss resolution and you just didn't quite make it, I do want you to check out Surefire Results for Weight Loss. It's a program I developed. Very simple, 3 lifestyle changes. You make those 3 lifestyle changes, and they're very simple lifestyle changes to make. In fact, most of my clients that have gone through it have been amazed with what they've been able to do with just these simple little changes. And you'll have me along with you each and every day to keep you on course, keep you going. It's a 28-day program. $1 a day is worth it. Make the investment in your health. Lose the weight. Guaranteed. You can find it at 40plusfitnesspodcast.com/surefire. That's 40plusfitnesspodcast.com/surefire. So, Jo, welcome to 40 Plus Fitness.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
I really enjoyed reading your book, Cure. And the interesting thing was, you know, as you kind of get into some of the topics, I thought they were, of course, very, very interesting, kind of on the edge of how maybe some Western medicine, some, I guess, for lack of a better word, I'm not going to say witchcraft, but kind of that woo-woo on the edge stuff that people might be practicing or doing. And then, you know, standard medicine and kind of where they're beginning to overlay. And there's some interesting findings that are coming out of that. And I thought that was a really interesting way to go about this, is kind of talking to both sides on each and every one of these issues. But the subtitle of your book, Cure, is A Journey into the Science of Mind over Body. And what I really appreciated about the book was the fact that you went to these places to experience it firsthand.
Yeah, that was really important to me. I think particularly with this kind of topic where you're talking about the importance of the mind and of experience, I wanted both to talk to patients as well as scientists. That was really important to me. I wanted to hear their stories, people who've tried these techniques and how that went for them. And I also wanted to experience it for myself so that I could try and explain that to other people as well. So yeah, I'm glad you picked up on that.
So I want to kind of lead off with the concept of the placebo effect. And I think most of us know that a placebo is kind of what we use when we do an experiment. And for most experiments, you give someone a sugar pill. I wish it didn't have sugar. Maybe they could put something else in it because I'm not a big fan of sugar now. But they give someone a sugar pill and they give someone else the medicine. And then they measure whether the medicine has a noticeable difference in how that placebo worked. But what your findings are, as you kind of went through some of this, was that a lot of people do get better taking the placebo, and there's a good reason why they do.
Yes, exactly. So most of us are familiar with placebos as a negative control, if you like. The definition of what doesn't work is what we compare drugs to in trials. But yeah, the reason we have to compare drugs against placebo is because placebos do work. It's a really well-known phenomenon that when people take placebo and they think it's a real medicine, then often they will feel better. And there's been this assumption that that's not really a real improvement, that maybe people are being fooled. They just think they feel better when really they don't, or maybe they would have just got better with time. But yeah, when I looked at it, there's actually decades worth of research now showing that there is something else going on, that taking a placebo, taking any medicine actually, triggers very specific changes in the brain that ease our symptoms, and that these are actually working through very similar biological pathways to the actual drugs. That was what was so surprising to me. So in pain, for example, when people respond to placebo painkiller, a sugar pill that they think is a painkiller, that triggers the release of endorphins in the brain. That is exactly the same mechanism that opioid painkillers work through. Things like morphine, they mimic endorphins in the brain. But then in other conditions, things like Parkinson's, when Parkinson's patients respond to placebo, that there's a flood of dopamine in their brain, which is the neurotransmitter that they're lacking, that they get when they take the real drug. Even in altitude sickness, scientists have been studying people, at the top of the Alps doing exercise and seen that you can give them fake oxygen. They think they're breathing extra oxygen when the canister's empty, and there's a reduction in the symptoms of altitude sickness. They're able to perform better, and that's caused through a reduction in chemicals called prostaglandins in the brain. So all of these different situations, we can take placebos and there's a real reduction in symptoms that is underpinned by biological changes. It's a real change that's happening, not just something that you imagine.
And then you got into a concept that I had not really wrapped my mind around before, so it's kind of interesting to get into, was the ethical use of placebos, because you don't really want your doctor lying to you and giving you sugar pills and saying, okay, you tell me you have a disease and here's a sugar pill, go home, and they feel better. The doctors have to kind of figure out how they can use this effect in their practice ethically.
Yeah, this has kind of been used as an excuse, I think, for conventional medicine to ignore research on placebos, because the dogma has always been that, placebos might work, but they'll only work if you think it's a real medicine. So your doctor would have to lie to you to prescribe one, and that's unethical. We can't do it. So no matter how interesting the actual research on placebos, we can't use them. So forget about it. But just in the last 5 years or so, there have been a whole series of trials showing that actually honest placebos can work as well. So where you take a placebo and you know it's a placebo, and that has been a big surprise. Nobody was expecting that. So trials in conditions like irritable bowel syndrome, depression, chronic low back pain, migraine, ADHD. So a kind of quite wide range of disorders. Sometimes people who have tried drug after drug that hasn't worked for them, and then they're given a placebo and it works. So the big discussion in the field at the moment is, well, why is that? And it seems that there's something to do with just being cared for is probably really important. We know that's an important factor in placebo responses, that just being cared for, being given a treatment, any treatment, is sort of telling the brain that it can switch off the warning signals, if you like, that the crisis is over, you're being cared for, and it eases off on symptoms. So that seems to be important, and perhaps that's having an effect even if you know that there isn't actually anything in the treatment. You're seeing a doctor, they're giving you something, you're being cared for. Also, in terms of expectation, it may be that this is just something different, that people given these placebos are also given information about how pain and other symptoms are ultimately controlled by the brain, and that we can modulate that with our expectations and beliefs. So perhaps just being told that is helpful and it's empowering, if you like. It gives them a role to play. It also gives them some hope and expectation that their pain or whatever symptom it is isn't intractable. So there's the research on exactly that is just beginning now, but those are some of the ideas for why honest placebos might still work.
And I think that kind of leads me to another concept you got into. You're from the UK, and there's a marathon runner. I mean, not a marathon, sorry. He ran a 5K, a Londoner. His name is Mo Farah. And you told his story, and it kind of wraps around that, kind of that same concept of hope, of how he was able to kind of push himself past some barriers that physically almost seem improbable or impossible, particularly when you look at the story about how long it took people to be able to break the 4-minute mile. And he was able to basically do a 4-minute mile while running an additional 2 beforehand. So this was his last mile that he ran this fast, not his either of his first 2. Can you kind of tell that story?
Yeah, so Mo Farah, I don't know if American listeners would have heard about him. Yeah, he's an Olympic runner. He won 2 gold medals for us in the 2012 Olympics in London. So that was why I just chose his story as an example, because that was such a big moment here. He'd won the 10,000 meter gold, and then he had the 5,000 to do as well, which was not his best event. He was not expected to win that, and he did. He won it. He got a second gold, and it was this incredible moment. The whole country just erupted, because the whole crowd was behind him. It was his home Olympics, and so he was just pushed to this incredible achievement. But what I also noticed about that story was, because I was watching it obviously when it happened on the TV, and he gave it everything. He pushed himself way further, gave it every ounce of every piece of energy that he had, every piece of muscle strength. And then as soon as he crossed the finish line, he jumps down onto the ground, starts doing these sort of sprightly sit-ups to everyone. He bounces up, he's running around the track, he's putting his hands over his head in this sort of M shape that's become his trademark. Suddenly he's got all this energy. So for me, it was like, well, how can somebody push themselves to the point of absolute exhaustion? They have nothing left to give, and then be bouncing up and jogging around the track. And it really feeds into a similar story. So I was talking about symptoms such as pain, ultimately being controlled by the brain. Physical symptoms from the body are clearly important in pain, but the research is showing that the brain is ultimately deciding what level of that symptom we need to be experiencing, depending on how severe it assesses a threat to be. And it can use neurotransmitters and different chemicals to push the pain up and down, and psychological cues feed into that. That's partly why placebos work. Fatigue is very similar. But for decades, it was assumed that when we feel exhaustion, it's because we exercise or we push ourselves and the muscles are getting tired, there's damage to the muscle fibers, they're running out of oxygen, there's build-up of waste products, and those physical signals are fed back to the brain. What's now emerging from research into fatigue is, yes, those signals are important, and there's obviously a physical limit to what we can do, but the sensation of fatigue, exhaustion itself is a psychological one. It's imposed by the brain well in advance of any physical signals from the muscles. And that makes sense if you think about it. So we don't, push ourselves to risk of death every time we race or run. And so that's partly explaining what happened with Mo Farah. And you see it a lot when athletes break world records or they win gold medals and they're exhausted and then suddenly they're bouncing up again. It's because the brain is imposing that exhaustion in advance of physical damage to the muscles. And then when it knows that there's nothing more to do, when a threat is lifted, then it can release those constraints, if you like, and then we have more energy in reserve. And there's a lot of interesting work looking at the role of the brain in physical performance. A lot of performance-enhancing drugs actually act on the brain, not muscles, for example. And we know there are strong placebo effects in fatigue. We know that just the sound of a gunshot, for example, can suddenly improve somebody's performance. There are lots of, or I don't know if people have had that experience of running a race, you're feeling really tired, but then you see the finish line. Then you know how far you've got to go. That uncertainty is lifted, and that's something that can cause the brain to lift constraints as well, and you suddenly get another burst of energy. So it's just this idea that just like pain with fatigue as well, it's not an absolute physical thing. It's not utterly dependent on the physical state of your body. Your brain is playing a role, and therefore your beliefs, hopes, attitudes, expectations can play a role in that. We have some control.
And I like how you took the kind of the new it's not a new concept, because we've been doing it with running. When I was in running in high school, we did fartleks, which were basically interval training. They've done a process now they call high intensity interval training. And I like how you kind of took how we can take the lessons learned from the high intense bout that we go through, and then after the recovery, we've kind of started to begin to train our mind that we have more in the tank than we might have given ourselves credit for. Could you kind of go a little bit into how we can use high-intensity interval training as a way to kind of start breaking down our fatigue state and improve our performance when we're trying to exercise?
Yeah, so we know that high-intensity interval training works, but this research just gives an interesting perspective into why it works. And so I mentioned that the brain is imposing this sensation of fatigue, and it's taking lots of different pieces of evidence information into account when it decides where to impose that sort of limit of exhaustion. And that's dependent on, how, what you've eaten that day, how far you've run already, how far you think you might have to go, oxygen levels, temperature, all of these different physical and psychological cues are coming in, and your brain kind of comes up with that's the safe limit. What you do with high intensity interval training is you push yourself close to that limit, and then you give yourself time to recover. And that's telling the brain, we went close to that limit, and that was fine, actually. So then the next time you push yourself, the brain will relax that a little bit and go, it was fine last time, so we can probably go a little bit further the next time. So by pushing and pushing, you're sort of coaxing the brain, if you like, into releasing extra resources, into letting you go a little bit further. And I just found that really fascinating. It just provided a really nice explanation to me for why that intensity training is working.
Yeah. And I think that could actually probably be applied to weightlifting as well, where someone would say, I know I was really close to getting this new weight that I was trying to do on eight reps, and here I am on the 7th or 8th rep really struggling, but I know that I've gotten that far, and I know that next time I come back, my muscles are going to be stronger. So allowing your brain kind of to get out of the way of yourself, you probably will progress faster than we would if we let that fear or that doubt kind of overshadow what we're actually capable of doing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the confidence just plays a huge role. I think that's what was happening with Mo Farah as well, being buoyed by the crowd and being pushed so far. But yeah, whenever we train, clearly that's really important in terms of, strengthening the muscles and increasing oxygen capacity and all of these physical things. But what it's also doing is training your mind, training your brain. So telling your brain that level of exertion is safe and it's okay to go a little bit further the next time. So it's the two things working together.
Awesome. So now you got into a topic in the book that I'm fascinated with, and I really honestly have not done a ton of research on, and it's basically heart rate variability and how the kind of the whole vagus nerve and all of that really kind of manages a lot of things for us, a lot of our health things that we haven't understood that much in the past. Could you go a little bit into heart rate variability and how that kind of process works?
Yes, I'll try. It's quite complicated.
It is. It actually is, yeah.
So the vagus nerve is a key part of a branch of the nervous system called the parasympathetic nervous system. And that acts in opposition to the sympathetic nervous system. So the sympathetic nervous system is what's behind the stress response, fight or flight. When you're nervous or scared or afraid, you feel your heart beating faster, your blood pressure's increasing, your pupils dilate, all those changes that happen when we're stressed. That's the sympathetic nervous system doing that. The parasympathetic nervous system works to oppose that, to calm all of that down, to relax us, to stop fight or flight going too far, if you like. So the vagus nerve is a key part of that parasympathetic nervous system that's calming everything down. And it acts as a damp on the heart rate, for example. It slows down the heart. We also know that it dampens inflammation. So this is a part of the immune system that's triggered when we're stressed. It's the body's first line of defense against infection and injury, so that's important in an emergency. But we know that chronic inflammation, if you're stressed all the time, is really bad. That can exacerbate autoimmune disease, for example, make us more susceptible to infection, disrupts wound healing. So the vagus nerve is involved in just calming all of that down, all aspects of stress from heart rate to immune responses. It's calming that down. And so what heart rate variability biofeedback can do, so where you're trying to train heart rate variability, is to stimulate the vagus nerve, to boost the activity of the vagus nerve. And so that's helping to calm the body down. Essentially, the vagus nerve, it's taking messages from the body to the brain and the brain to the body. It's going in both directions. And so there's two ways to strengthen the vagus nerve, if you like. You can either calm your mind down. There's evidence that techniques like meditation, for example, can boost the vagus nerve, and that in turn calms down the body. Or you can calm down your body, and that triggers the vagus nerve, which will then have that effect on the mind. And it seems that that's actually the more efficient way of doing it. Most of the messages that the vagus nerve carries go from the body to the mind, not the other way around. So by using heart rate variability, for example, where you're slowing your breathing down, there's evidence to show that is triggering the activity of the vagus nerve, so you're strengthening that activity overall, and that helps to keep both your body and mind calmer. People who've got a stronger, they call it vagal tone, this measure of the activity of the vagus nerve, they are less likely to die of heart disease, for example, and there are also quite a lot of psychological benefits. People with stronger vagal tone have a more flexible emotional response to stress, for example. They do better on cognitive tests. They have a lower risk of psychiatric conditions like schizophrenia, anxiety, and depression, for example. So it's quite a complicated picture. You've got sort of different webs of things happening and messages going in both directions. But in general, heart rate variability is just one way to trigger the vagus nerve, which then helps your body to respond better to stress overall.
Okay. And as I understand it, and as I got from the book, is when we talk about heart rate variability, what it is technically is that all of our heartbeats are not occurring at like a metronome style beat, 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 beat. We might think that's how it's working, but they're actually, your heart's taking breaks and in some cases beating faster in between these ranges. And the more that your heart rate is able to kind of span the different needs of your body, it kind of, that's the vagal tone. That's where that's all kind of really going to, is the fact that you now have an efficient heart system that's providing just enough blood flow, blood pressure through your body for you to do what your body needs it to do at that point in time.
Yeah, that's right. So as you say, the heart rate is varying all the time, and there's a few different ways that it varies. So one of them is with your breathing. So when you breathe out, the vagus nerve slows the heart. And then when you breathe in, the heart rate speeds up again. And that's so that you have a nice little boost in heart rate when you're breathing in to push all that oxygen in the oxygenated blood around the body. But when you breathe out, the vagus nerve is calming it, so it gives the heart a rest, if you like. Your heart rate is lower overall. And also it helps the heart to be more flexible. It can respond better to stresses and challenges if it has a bigger variability. But there's another cycle where the heart rate goes up and down, which is linked to blood pressure. So there's a reflex in the brain where if your blood pressure rises, it slows the heart. Then when your blood pressure goes down, it speeds the heart up again. So it's just a cycle that's keeping your blood pressure within safe limits. And normally those two cycles, the one where your heart rate varies with your breathing and where it varies with your blood pressure, are happening at different speeds. So the heart rate variability is kind of a bit messy. It's kind of all over the place. These two different cycles are superimposed. What happens with heart rate variability, where you slow the breathing down, is you breathe then in time with that blood pressure related cycle. It's usually about 5 seconds in, 5 seconds out. So you get both of those cycles happening at the same time. The peaks and troughs get superimposed. So you have much higher peaks and lower troughs. And so then your heart rate variability overall is increased. And the idea is that that's giving a sort of extra boost, if you like, to that vagus nerve activity. And it's also helping your heart to be more flexible, because it's like a workout. It's helping the heart to be used to going up and down. So the more flexible and responsive your heart rate is, the healthier you're going to be and the less risk you're going to have of heart disease. So it's a little bit complicated, but I hope that makes some sense.
Right. And you went to a clinic and kind of used a tool for this biofeedback, but there's apps on the phone. Are you familiar? Are there any apps that you would recommend?
I'm not sure if I would recommend a particular app, but yeah, there are loads of them. So they work in sort of different ways. Sometimes this is done by just giving you a set speed. So you're breathing in 5 seconds and you're breathing out 5 seconds. And that works. That's fine. And the slightly more complicated way of doing it, with the biofeedback, is actually to give you a sort of a readout of your heart rate variability, so you can see it increasing, because it's called the baro reflex, this slower cycle of heart rate related to the blood pressure, and the speed of that is slightly different in everyone depending on how, the size of your body and how much blood you've got pumping around. And so what you want to do is get your breathing exactly in time with that, and it's going to be about 5 seconds in, 5 seconds out, but you can only get it kind of exactly on for you if you've got that extra biofeedback added with some kind of heart rate sensor feeding into a display. So there's different ways of doing it, but in general, just slowing down your breathing is helpful. It's probably one of the ways in which techniques like meditation work, or any technique where you're doing slow, controlled breathing. There are probably other benefits as well to meditation, but one of the things is just simply slowing down the breathing calms your body down, it boosts heart rate variability, it activates the vagus nerve, and therefore that's helping to strengthen the parasympathetic nervous system and keep the fight or flight response in check.
Well, that's awesome. And so again, there are a lot of other mind-body things that you have in the book, and I love again how you went to the science and you went to kind of what some of the practices were, and you compared and contrasted those and showed how, one might not be better than the other by itself. And maybe there's a way that we can use a little bit of both when we need to heal ourselves, when we want to get healthier. So I just really appreciated that. The interesting thing is March is going to be mindset is this new challenge that I'm rolling out. Each month I like to roll out a brand new challenge for everybody. And so the 28-day challenge for March is going to be a mindset challenge where we're going to start thinking more about how our mindset affects our body and our health. And I think this book is a great kind of a primer for folks to get into understanding how powerful their mind can be for their body. Again, the title is Cure. And so, Jo, if someone wanted to get in touch with you or find out more about the book, where would you like for me to send them?
The best place is probably my website, which is just Jo Marchant, JoMarchant.com. And that's got information about the book. There's a dedicated page for Cure. There's links to other articles that I've written. There's a contact form on there. So everything someone would need will be on my website.
Awesome. And I'll have a link to that in our show notes, which is at 40plusfitnesspodcast.com/218. So, Jo, thank you so much for sharing today. This was some awesome information. I really appreciate the book, and I really appreciate you being here today. Thank you.
Thank you, and good luck with the Mindset Challenge.
Thank you. Yep. If you're looking for the new challenges for March, I just posted them. You can go to 40plusfitnesspodcast.com/challenges and join us on the March challenges. I'm excited for March because we're going to do the sugar challenge again. We're also going to do the burpee challenge again. So if you missed those last time, you'll have an opportunity to sign up for them again. Or if you did them last time and would just like to do it again, they'll be there for that. The new challenge for March, which I just told you about a minute ago, is the Mindset Challenge. And I've been working on this one pretty hard. It's pretty interesting. I'm really enjoying the exercise of this, and I think you will too. So go to 40plusfitnesspodcast.com/challenges, and you can join our challenges there. All of them, actually this time, you could do all of them together and complement each other quite nicely for a full holistic program for the month of March. So again, 28-day programs. We have the burpee challenge, the sugar challenge, and now the new Mindset Challenge. I hope you'll join us there. Next time on the 40 Plus Fitness Podcast, I kind of go into a little bit of rant mode with 11 of my health and fitness pet peeves. So yeah, I'm going to let it rant a little bit, but hey, got to do that every once in a while, right? Until then, have a happy and healthy day.